What is Norse mythology? Norse mythology is the religion of the Vikings and the Germanic people of the Middle Ages. It's a collection of stories or myths centered around many complicated characters, such as Thor, Odin, and Loki. These stories gave meaning to the Vikings' lives, and they often prayed to and worshipped the various characters in Norse myth. Most of what we know about Norse mythology was passed down orally generation after generation, and eventually written down by historians. In the stories of Norse myth, we hear the epic tales and legendary stories of the Norse gods, whom I will be introducing you to in this video. In Norse mythology, there are two different families of gods, called the Aesir and the Vanir. The Aesir gods live in a world called Asgard, and most of the well-known Norse gods belong to the Aesir. The most famous Aesir gods are as follows. Odin, chief of the Aesir and ruler of Asgard. He is the highest and holiest of all the gods. He gave an eye for wisdom and carries a spear forged by the dwarves of Svartalheim. His spear is so strong that its point cannot be broken. Odin drank the mead of poetry, and he uses a pair of ravens to spy and survey the events of Midgard. Odin himself frequently visits Midgard, always in his usual disguise, an old man with a brimmed hat dressed in gray or blue, carrying a spear or a staff. He is called the Allfather, as all the gods are descended from him. He is a god of war, wisdom, and poetry. Thor is the son of Odin, and perhaps the most famous of all the gods. He is called the Thunderer, and is the strongest of all the gods. His primary weapon is his hammer called Mjolnir. He is the guardian of the Aesir, and he protects Asgard from the giants. His archenemy is the Midgard serpent Jormungand, the giant snake that lives in the ocean surrounding Midgard. Thor is oftentimes associated with farming and agriculture, and is the god of the common man, whereas Odin is associated with the upper class and their pursuits of poetry and leading in war. Thor rides a chariot driven by two goats, and when he is hungry, he eats one of the goats, but later resurrects that goat back to life. Loki is the trickster god, and he is the son of a giant. Loki is cunning and deceptive, and although not inherently evil, he is not a force for good. Loki is mischievous and can shapeshift. He once shapeshifted into a female horse and bore Odin's eight-legged horse Sleipnir. Loki will fight the gods alongside the giants at Ragnarok. He also has 4 children: Hel, the wolf Fenrir, Narfi, and the Midgard serpent. Frigg is the wife of Odin and the queen of Asgard. Her stepson is Thor, and she is often associated with love, marriage, and fertility. Although she is the highest-ranking goddess, not much is known about Frigg, other than her complicated marriage to Odin. Tyr, along with Odin and Thor, is one of the chief gods associated with war. The Romans often associated him with their own god of war, Mars. But more than war, Tyr is a god of law and justice. The most famous story of Tyr's justice goes something like this. The wolf Fenrir was becoming very strong, and the gods began to fear him. The gods sought to bind him, and Fenrir complied, but requested that one of the gods place their arm inside his mouth as a way of creating some trust. If Fenrir could not escape the binding, then he would bite off the arm of whoever placed it in his mouth. Tyr was the only volunteer. Once bound up, Fenrir could not escape the binding, so he bit off Tyr's arm. Just as Odin is called the One-Eyed, so Tyr is called the One-Armed. Heimdall is the guardian of Asgard. He lives atop Bifrost, the bridge that connects Asgard to our world, Midgard. He requires less sleep than a bird, and his hearing is so keen that he can hear the grass growing in the ground and the wool growing on the sheep. He is known as the Watchman of the gods, and carries a great horn which he will sound at Ragnarok to warn the gods in Asgard of the coming army of giants. Although the Vanir god family is smaller, there are still some gods worth mentioning. Of the Vanir god family, there is Njord, who is associated with the sea as well as wealth and fertility. Njord's giantess wife Skadi married him by mistake because she had confused him with the beautiful god Baldur. Their marriage was brief, as they could not agree on a place to live. Half of their time was spent at Skadi's home in the mountains, and the other half was spent at Njord's home by the sea. Freyr is the son of Njord and is loved by all. He is very handsome, and he lives among the elves in Elfheim. He also rides a chariot driven by 2 boars. And lastly, there is Freyja. She is the daughter of Njord and the sister of Freyr. She is often associated with love and beauty, and is the most beautiful of all the goddesses. I have now introduced you to only some of the many Norse gods. If you've enjoyed this video and would like to hear more about the stories and legends of the Norse gods, then check out out my podcast, The History of Vikings, or go to my website, thehistoryofvikings.com, where you will find all kinds of episodes about Norse mythology.
So, a massive thank you here to my friend Noah from the History of Vikings podcast. A link will be in the description below to this podcast so that you can go over and watch some more videos on the history of the Vikings, as well as the religion and the mythology and the gods and goddesses, and all sorts of things like this, as well as interviews with famous people in sort of the Viking world of historians and academics and other famous figures there. So, actually, a very exciting piece of news is that he is not only on his podcast channel, which I will have linked, but he recently started his YouTube channel. So if you're interested to watch any more videos made by Noah on the topic of the Vikings and Old Norse and things like this, then go to the description below. It would mean the world to me if you'd go over and give him a subscribe and watch some of his first videos on there for more content like this in the future. So thank you very much. I'm History with Hilbert. This video was made by the History of Vikings, and I hope you tune in again next time.